Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to invite on stage author, scientist, professor, and an eminent thinker from our country. Dr. Ranganathan obtained his BSc Honours degree in chemistry from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, after which he went on to do his scholarship in Cambridge, UK, where he obtained BA Tripos in Natural Sciences, his MA and his PhD. After a postdoctoral stint in Cambridge, Dr. Anand returned to India to join International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, Delhi, where he ran his lab for 16 years as a staff research scientist. In 2015, he joined the Special Center for Molecular Medicine, JNU, Delhi, and became a full-time professor in 2019. His laboratory works in the area of directed evolution and pathogenesis with special emphasis on tuberculosis and malaria. Scientific contributions from Anand's lab have been published in peer-reviewed journals like the Journal of Biological Chemistry, Chemistry and Biology, the Journal of Infectious Diseases, Journal of Clinical Investigation, and Nature Communications. Dr. Anand Ranganathan writes and appears frequently on television debates on politics, media, and science. His columns have appeared in Swaraj, DNA, NL First Post, and Quartz. He is also the consulting editor of Swaraj. Dr. Anand has authored 5 books: The Land of Wilted Rose, Rupa 2012, For Love and Honor, Bloomsbury 2015, The Rat Eater, Bloomsbury 2019, Souffle, Penguin 2023, and Hindus in Hindu Rashtra 2023. His forthcoming book is on India's Forgotten Scientist, published by Penguin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage author, professor, and scientist, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here. I really would like to thank the organizers. It's actually now like coming back to the family. And, people have a few wishes that they hope would come true. In my case, I've always had 2 wishes. Pehli ye ki I would marry the woman of my dreams. That came true. So that woman is now my wife. Unfortunately for her. And the second was that I wish I was a Jain. So, wo ho nahi sakta genetically, I suppose, but honorary Jain, I hope I can be anointed that. Thank you. And thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me, giving me time out here. लेकिन मैंने अंकित को पहले ही वॉर्न किया था. मैंने कहा अंकित आप इनवाइट तो कर रहे हो लेकिन मेरे साथ एक प्रॉब्लम है. तो उन्होंने कहा क्या? मैंने कहा मैं हर जगह बस एक ही बार बुलाया जाता हूँ. तो उन्होंने कहा समझ में नहीं आया. तो मैंने कहा आई गेव हिम एन एग्जाम्पल. लास्ट ईयर आई वॉज कॉल्ड टू अ डिबेट इन कोलकाता and the topic was media a watchdog. And my turn came and I said, what are you talking about? Media a watchdog? Media is a lapdog. आप लोगों को जो पैसा देती है सरकार, आप जो छापना होता है वो कहते हैं ये छापो, you print that, you run fake narratives, fake news, और जब न्यूज़ फेक प्रूव हो जाती है तो फ्रंट पेज की जगह पेज नंबर 16 पे नीचे कॉलम पे अपॉलॉजी कर देते हैं. सारा पैसा आपको गवर्नमेंट एड से मिलता है. They tell you, they dictate to you. You run fake narratives. You think you are powerful because you're taking money from them. You're not watchdogs. You are lapdogs. And the worst culprit is the Telegraph newspaper of Kolkata. Whatever Didi says, आप वो छाप देते हैं. Didi कहती है ये मत छापो, TMC के बारे में नहीं छापते हैं. So you are not watchdogs. You are lapdogs. I didn't know the debate was sponsored by Telegraph. वहाँ से भागा सीधे एयरपोर्ट और दीदी की टेरिटरी से लोग कह रहे हैं सर 10 मिनट है फ्लाइट में, सर अब 5 मिनट बाकी है सर, सर बोर्ड कर दिया आपने? फिर 6 महीने पहले दिल्ली में ही यूनिवर्सिटी में आई वॉज इन्वाइटेड टू अ डिबेट, और वहाँ पे इनफैक्ट डिबेट नहीं थी, एक टॉक थी, सेशन था, पॉलिटिक्स एंड बियॉन्ड, एंड माई टर्न केम एंड आई सेड देखिए आंट वी ऑल टायर्ड बैशिंग द लिविंग डे लाइट्स आउट ऑफ पॉलिटिशियंस, और सबसे ज़्यादा रात को तो मैं ही करता हूँ उनको. सो लेट अस कॉन्सेंट्रेट ऑन अनदर पिलर ऑफ आवर डेमोक्रेसी, जिसके बारे में वी डोंट जस्ट नॉट क्रिटिसाइज, वी आर स्केयर्ड टू क्रिटिसाइज, एंड दैट इज द जुडिशरी. बिकॉज द फैक्ट ऑफ द मैटर इज, if there is one arm of our democracy that is fledgling, that is termite ridden, that is completely about to collapse, it is not the legislature of the executive, it is the judiciary, and the judges need to be held accountable. There are 53 million pending cases in India right now, more than the population of South Korea and Kenya. और जितने में हम cases dispose कर रहे हैं, उस स्पीड से अगर हम चलें तो इट विल टेक अस 323 years टू डिस्पोज द केसेस. मैंने कहा चल क्या रहा है ये? हाउ इज दिस? इट्स नॉट दैट द व्हील्स ऑफ जस्टिस ग्राइंड स्लोली. द व्हील्स ऑफ जस्टिस हैव कम टू अ हॉल्ट, एंड देयर इज करप्शन फ्रॉम टॉप टू बॉटम. 34% ऑफ ऑल जुडिशियल पोजीशंस इन हाई कोर्ट आर लाइंग वेकेंट, और 53 मिलियन केसेस पेंडिंग है. 24% ऑफ ऑल जुडिशियंस ऑल ओवर इंडिया आर लाइंग वेकेंट. There is so much nepotism, there is collegium system, judges don't want democracy to get them elected. They say that we will elect our own. There is only 10% of judges have ever declared their assets, जबकि सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने खुद कहा है कि सारे जजेस को डिक्लेयर करना चाहिए. इतनी करप्शन है कि 9 सुप्रीम कोर्ट चीफ जस्टिसेस ने सील्ड एनवलप में लिखा कि there is rampant corruption in higher judiciary. ये चल क्या रहा है यहाँ पे? Fact of the matter is 1,35,000 cases that are pending are as old as 35 years old. 2.5 lakh rape and POXO cases are lying unattended. 71% of all Indian prisoners are under trial. उनका अभी तक बेल ही नहीं मिली है, उनको जेल में सड़ रहे हैं वो. There are only 20 judges per million Indian population. In America it is 180 judges. So everything is completely rotten. और अभी चीफ जस्टिस ने कहा था कि we have speeded up justice, we are getting more accessible and affordable to the common man. इससे ज़्यादा झूठ तो हो ही नहीं सकता. इंडिया की रैंकिंग in the accessibility and affordability of justice is 107, below Nepal and Sri Lanka. तो मैंने कहा if there at all there is one thing that needs to be corrected, it is the judges and the judiciary. They should be taken to task. There is a high court in India, Punjab and Haryana High Court. वहाँ पे 34% of everyone who's working there are related to each other. Judges, lawyers, clerks, सब एक रिश्तेदार हैं. मैंने कहा चल क्या रहा है ये? So if at all people need to take someone to task, it's not the politician, it's the judges. And then मैंने जो बोला खत्म किया. I went back to the dais. The person sitting next to me was the Chief Justice of Allahabad High Court. मैं भूल गया, मैं ड्राइव करके आया था, अपनी गाड़ी वहीं छोड़ी, उबर लेके भागा. तो मैंने अंकित से कहा अंकित यार देख लो मैं हर जगह है. तो उन्होंने कहा डोंट वरी सर, प्लीज कम. सो लेडीज एंड जेंटलमैन, हियर आई एम in the hope that I will never be called again. But thank you so much for this honor. In the half an hour that I have, I want to talk about something that not many of us talk about lately. And that's very close to our heart. और अगर हम लोग उस बारे में बात नहीं करेंगे तो वो बात एकदम पीछे हट जाएगी, and then वो झटका हमें फिर सालों बाद लगेगा. I want to talk about the fact that we are at an inflection point. We are about to take off. हर कोई एक दिमाग में उनके है, एक फ्रेज है विकसित भारत. You have heard that phrase. Everyone is thinking of India will be a viksit Bharat by 2047. We are at an inflection point. We are about to take off. But unless we decipher what are the fundamentals of success, how does someone become successful? How does a company become successful? How do nations become successful? I'm afraid we will be, if I can have the slideshow please in the background, that will run. As I say, right now we are walking on a treadmill. I want us as a nation to jump on from the treadmill to the travelator. यू सी ट्रेडमिल की ये बात होती है और हम सब ट्रेडमिल पे चलते हैं. मैंने भी 10 साल पहले एक ट्रेडमिल खरीदी थी, इन्फोमर्शियल, रात को 2 बजे देख रहा था. अब उस पर कपड़े सूखते हैं. बट द पॉइंट इज, इफ यू डू नॉट show the bottom half of the treadmill, it gives the impression that you are going somewhere, you're walking or you're jogging, but the displacement is zero. और हमारी अभी situation वो है. We are all huffing and puffing on the treadmill. I want us to go on to the travelator, but how does one do that? One does that after recognizing and realizing what are the fundamentals of success. और problem ये होती है, जैसे the adage goes that success hides failures. So the more successful you are as a person, as a company, as a country, the more failures you don't want to show, or the more failures you don't want to acknowledge. और अगर आप politicians हैं, तो आप failure तो कभी acknowledge करते ही नहीं हैं, जबकि आपकी पूरी life अगर failure पे based हो. So this is what I want to get to the bottom of in the next half an hour or what I have, and then we'll throw it for a lovely question and answer session, and it will be a real pleasure to interact. At the bottom of what I want to talk about are the gradations of what fundamentals are as far as success is concerned. लेकिन उससे पहले हमें ये देखना होगा, have we been a success as a country? कौन जज करेगा? कैसे जज होगा? So if we look back, there are parameters. If we look back from our independence, 1947, there are parameters we can decide whether we have been a success or not. और कुछ parameters मैं आपको देना चाहूँगा. For example, in 1947, when we attained independence, our life expectancy was 32 years, 32 साल. Today it is upwards of 76 years. In 1947, our literacy rate was 12.5%. Today it is upwards of 86%. So yes, we've been relatively successful. The graph we can see is going in one direction. In 1947, our poverty rate was 71%. Today it is 4.5%. And the most troubling, when we attained independence in 1947, our infant mortality rate, IMR, ये पाकिस्तानी ड्रोन तो नहीं है ना? Our IMR was 160, which meant that out of 1,000 babies that were born in 1947, 160 did not live to see 1 year. How tragic is that? Right now it is 24, and in some states like Kerala, it is better than the IMR of some European countries, 6 or 7. So yes, we've seen, we know these are the broad fundamentals of what success is, and we've been relatively successful. And if you were to scrunch the timeline even further, not just 75 years, let's talk about the last 10 years, because that is what matters in contemporary times. ये कहना बड़ा आसान है कि हम 70 साल पहले successful थे, लेकिन अब क्या हाल है? So if we scrunch the timeline, not 75 but 10 years, I would say we've been stunningly successful. Let me give you a few parameters. In 2014, the percentage of Indian population that was multidimensionally poor, ये एक नया metric निकाला है लोगों ने, multidimensional poverty that takes care of health, HDI indicators, wealth, so on and so forth, education. 29% of our population was multidimensionally poor. 10 years later today, it is 11%. So yes, this is stunning success. In the last 10 years, we have literally pulled 250 million Indians out of multidimensional poverty. I think that's a stunning achievement. In the last 10 years, in 2014, our GDP per capita was $1,500. Right now, it is upwards of $2,700, nearly doubled. In fact, agar aap PPP dekhen, so we have doubled our GDP per capita. In 2014, our foreign exchange reserves were $300 billion. Today, it is $705 billion. In 2014, there were 5 cities that had metros. Today, there are 20 cities that had metros. In 2014, we had 74 airports. Today, we have 148 airports. In 2014, 21,000 kilometers of railway lines were electrified. Right now, we've almost electrified all railway lines. Only 3,000 are left. 65,000 kilometers of railway lines have been electrified. And there is a reason why I call Nitin Gadkari ji not as human but alien. Because in the last 10 years, we have built half the length of highways that we had built in 60 years previous to 10 years. और वो असली में एलियन है, क्योंकि मैं उनका अभी पॉडकास्ट कहीं देख रहा था, वो कह रहे थे मैं बैरियाट्रिक सर्जरी के लिए, वो खाना बहुत पसंद करते हैं, तो वो खुद बता रहे थे मैं बैरियाट्रिक सर्जरी के लिए जा रहा था और ऑपरेशन से 1 घंटा पहले मैंने 5 प्लेट छोले भटूरे खा लिए। वो ह्यूमन नहीं कर सकता, वो एलियन ही कर सकता है। Or the wealth managers, all of you are wealth managers and wealth creators, you would appreciate this. In 2014, our AUMs or assets under management mutual funds were 9 lakh crores. Today it is 70 lakh crores in 10 years. Our installed solar capacity was 2 gigawatts. Today, last week, it crossed 100 gigawatts in 10 years. Our electronics exports were $7 billion in 2014. Today, it is $25 billion. So, it is stunning success. And one of the most pleasing aspects of this stunning success is that in 2014, we had 350 startups. Today, 10 years later, we have 120,000 startups. So yes, not just relative success. We've seen stunning success. And if you were to scrunch the timeline even further, not just 75 years, not just 10 years, but the last 1 year, we've been spectacularly successful. Let me give you a few parameters. Our GST collections have been the highest ever since records began last year, $270 billion. Number of vehicles sold, highest ever since records began, 25 million. Number of jobs created, highest ever, 46 million. Income taxpayers, highest ever, 100 million. We have our central government debt to GDP ratio, 5-year low of 53%. Our PMI manufacturing, highest ever, 59.2. We have our inflation at a 7-year low of 1.54%. और अगर आप 2017 का एक blip हटा दे जो 1.53% था, तो it is going back to 17-18 years, it is as low. जैसे वो गाना है ना, ऐसा पहली बार हुआ है 17-18 सालों में. तो inflation is at that level. लोग पहले इलेक्शन लड़ते थे महंगाई पे, आजकल कोई इलेक्शन महंगाई पे लड़ ही नहीं रहा है. People are finding reasons किस पे लड़ें इलेक्शन. We have, for example, one of the most pleasing parameters is the inequality. जैसे लोग कहते हैं कि inequality बढ़ी है. In fact, the Gini coefficient that measures inequality, the lower the Gini coefficient, the more equal the society is at its lowest since records began for India, 0.25. And the most pleasing, the fact that our exports are the highest ever since record began in India, $825 billion. And our Sensex, क्या बताएं उसका, 85,000 last year. So, not just relative success, not just stunning success, but we have seen as a nation spectacular success. And many of you must be thinking, ये फिर क्या बोल रहा है कि fundamentals हमें success के सीखने चाहिए अगर हमें विकसित भारत बनना है, हम तो बन गए. What is he talking about? Glass half full, half empty? No, the glass is brimming. To that I would say, why is it then that till today, we have 300 million Indians living on 60 rupees a day? Why is it that till today, 150 million Indian children are out of school? Why is it that 34% of all Indian infants under 5 are chronically malnourished and stunted? Why is it that 20% of all poor Indian children have never been vaccinated? Why is it that we have a situation where 70% of India is still without network connectivity? Why is it that only 2% of adult Indians pay tax? In the UK, it is 66%. Why is it the fact that 8 million Indian children are forced into child labor? Why is it that till today we have 18 million Indians in bonded labor? Why is it that our rank in the World Hunger Index is as high as 111? And why is it that till today our GDP per capita is ranked 136th, below even Sri Lanka and until a few months ago, even Bangladesh? So clearly there are issues that we have achieved spectacular success in. But it is a coin that has two sides. And unless we realize what makes a nation successful, how can we hide this truth Should we hide this truth and display to the world that yes, we are about to become Viksit Bharat when we have all these very troubling data that affects our health, our wealth, and our prosperity? And I put it to you, the reason for this is that we are confused as a state and as a people as to what our role should be. And this right here is the confusion that has allowed us to have or become a coin with two sides. Let me exemplify this with a show of hands. If I were to, for example, ask you, can you name me one government scheme in the last 75 years since we got independence, 78 years? Just one government scheme or a policy that has helped our nation grow economically the most. Just one. आप क्या कहेंगे? आपके दिमाग में सबसे पहले आएगा liberalization, which is absolutely true. जैसा आपने कहा, in 1990, we were almost bankrupt. जो मैंने कहा आज foreign exchange reserves हैं $705 billion, तब they had dwindled down to $3 billion. In fact, we mortgaged 67 tons of our gold. We loaded them onto the ships. It was about to dock at the Bank of England. And then we decided, no, we need to change tack. And then came, of course, the economic liberalization. So yes, you're absolutely right. Any other policy, just one policy that has helped our economy grow most? Yes, sir. GST, yes, absolutely fine. GST has worked wonders here. Yes, bank, absolutely. You have Jan Dhan, 600 million. The financial inclusion of our citizenry cannot be underestimated. So manufacturing, PMI manufacturing is the highest ever. But did you notice something? Manager Digital India, thank you so much. Absolutely wonderful. Digital India has revolutionized the way Indians are interacting economically and prospering. But did you notice something? I asked a question where I had myself put the parameters or defined the parameters of that question. I asked, give me one policy that has helped our economy grow the most, and all your answers were absolutely correct, each one of them. But all of them were concerning the finance and the economy. What if I were to tell you that according to me, the one government policy that has helped India grow economically the most has got nothing to do with economics or finance? It is the midday meal scheme. Just one policy. Every single day, 130 million Indian children go to school. 130 million. And their parents send them to school so that they may get an education, they may get wiser, but more importantly, they may get a hot, nutritious meal. They may get healthier, which is now mandated by our Supreme Court to be of minimum 430 kilocalories. 130 million children. Millions have gone through this. And the person who thought of this plan and implemented it, K. Kamraj, never even went to school. So ladies and gentlemen, next time people from our socio-economic strata think, oh, we need an undergraduate, we need a graduate to be a politician, doctor, engineer, MBA, a tycoon, a businessman, think again. Here was one person who never even went to school, K. Kamraj. And he implemented a scheme that has helped our economy grow the most. And this right here should be the role of the state. The role of the state is to create a healthier, wealthier, wiser, more adaptable, more flexible workforce. That's all. The role of the state is not to use that workforce. That is what confusion has come to us. That we are using whatever workforce we are creating as a state. The role of the state is to create that workforce and to give it to you, the wealth creators, for you to use that workforce. And this right here is the confusion. And it is a confusion that is enveloping not just the state that I will discuss about, giving a couple of examples, but also us as a citizen. And unless we remove this situation, this confusion rather, I'm afraid hopping on from the treadmill, as I say to the travelator, is a distant dream. And as distant as Viksit Bharat at 2047, if not 2097 or even beyond that. So now that I have demarcated what the role of the state has to be to create a healthier, wealthier, wiser, more flexible workforce, let me give you a couple of examples as to what I mean, because time is also running out. Let's talk about a more adaptable, more flexible workforce. Did you know that 44% of India's workforce of 600 million Indians. Give or take a few million. Some say it is 585 million. Some say it has gone up to 615 million. Average 600 million. 44% of our workforce is involved in agriculture, a sector that contributes only 14 to 14.5% to our GDP. In the West, it is not more than 2% of the workforce that is involved in agriculture. Even if you look at some middle-income economies or some economies that are developing now fast on the road to completely developed economies, not more than 3.5%. In our country, 44%, 250 to 300 million Indians are involved in a sector that is contributing pitifully to our economy. ऐसे विकसित भारत कैसे हो सकता है? Because from production to purchase, everything is archaic. Let me exemplify that for you to understand what the gravity of the situation is and how, as a state, we are just blind to it, sometimes deliberately or sometimes with intent. Now, let's demarcate it further into what we produce and where we produce to make it very clear. 70 million hectares of Indian agricultural land, almost 40% of all available Indian agricultural land, has been almost totally or nearly totally destroyed by floods and drought in the last 6 years. ये हम दे रहे हैं farmers को as an instrument to produce. वो क्या produce करेंगे? 40% of Indian agriculture is totally dependent on the monsoon. 40%. 82% of all farmers and cropland is not insured. 110,000 farmers have committed suicide in the last 10 years. 110,000, more than a lakh. Or किसी sector में, if there is a suicide, I know it's a tragedy. Every suicide is a tragedy. But if there is a suicide of an employee in an IT sector, the news runs for a week. People go into the detail as to what has happened, what were the reasons why this is happening, and how the terminal decline of this sector is now upon us. Here, 110,000 farmers have committed suicide, and we haven't even blinked an eye. The situation is so catastrophic that we are growing things. Now let me come to what we are growing. India is the world's second largest producer of sugarcane. Every year we produce 500 billion kilograms of sugarcane. Now sugarcane is a very water-intensive crop. It requires only 9% of the arable land, but 72% of all irrigable water. In fact, the amount of water that is required to grow 500 billion kilograms of sugarcane is 1 quadrillion liters. I didn't even know the word quadrillion existed. I thought things finished after 1 trillion. So I put this in perspective for you. That is the amount of water that is present in 10 Ganga Sagar dams. And that is the amount of water that India uses to grow sugarcane. 500 billion kilograms of it. And sugar prices, they have halved in the last 7 years. One politician got up and said, मैं ऐसा नहीं होने सकता. We are going to go bankrupt. We are going to run out of water, out of land. And that, as it happens, that person is once again the chief minister. I talk of Mr. Fadnavis. First time he was the chief minister. He said, we can't continue like this. From now on, any farmer who wants to grow sugarcane would have to take government permission for it. And this was a master stroke, क्योंकि हमारे देश में पता है, अगर कोई काम आप नहीं करवाना चाहते हो, तो सरकार की permission के लिए कह दो. Absolutely fantastic decision by the chief minister. But within 3 months, he had to go back on this order. I won't name the politician who forced him to go back on this order. We as a state have awarded him nation's second highest honor. But the fact of the matter is that politician runs liquor industry in Maharashtra. And molasses is required there. It is the byproduct of sugar in production. ये है role state का. हम 50 साल की बात तो छोड़िए, 2047 हम अगले 5 साल का भी नहीं सोच रहे. People are thinking of what is the cultivation of sugarcane doing to us as an agricultural society and as water depletion. Our water availability per capita has gone down by 48% in the last 45 years, from 2,800 cubic meters in 1984 to 1,400 cubic meters now. In fact, the United Nations says the water availability per capita required for civilized living, that's their phrase, is 1700 cubic meters. So we are officially uncivilized right now. 78% of all river water which is used for irrigation goes waste into the ocean every monsoon. 3,200 billion cubic feet of Godavari river water, 3,200 billion cubic feet goes waste into the ocean. And what is the water requirement for the entire state of Tamil Nadu? 1,800 billion cubic feet. And what are the politicians doing? They are busy cutting ribbons, ferrying water trains from the flood-prone areas to the drought-prone areas. You would have seen in Latur 4 years ago, there was a massive drought, and the politicians were cutting ribbons, being proud. They are sending water trains to Latur. We shouldn't be sending water trains. We should be linking rivers. The fact of the matter is that 3 Supreme Court benches have ordered 5 governments in the last 35 years with 4 prime ministers in there, assenting to it, that we must link 30 rivers. Engineers, scientists, ecologists, all have come to this conclusion that in order for India to survive this fluctuation of extreme drought and extreme flood, we need to link 30 rivers. We need immediately post-linking, what will happen? We will irrigate 30 million additional hectares of Indian agricultural land. It will transform the face of our agriculture and society and catapult us into a developed country very soon. But what is the result? That it is only 6 months ago that this Prime Minister, after 35 years of Supreme Court cajoling us, laid the foundation stone for the first river linking project, Ken Betwa Link. What has the state done? I'll tell you what the state has done, admirably. The state has built Narmada Dam. Right now, Narmada Dam irrigates 2.5 million hectares of agricultural land across 5 states. It gives power, electricity to 1.3 million homes. It gives drinkable water to 33 million households across 5 states. It's a great project, but there is one fact associated with it. The foundation stone of Narmada Dam was laid by Jawaharlal Nehru. It was inaugurated by Narendra Modi. It has taken 50 years for us to realize one major project. ऐसे हम विकसित होंगे. Now let me very quickly come to what we produce, having told you where we produce what we produce. 70 million tons of Indian fruits and vegetables go waste every year. 70 million tons. We produce 320 million tons of food grains. What is our storage capacity? 148 million tons. Half of what we produce we cannot store in godowns. It is lying in the open. Rats are having it, eating it. It is fungus and infection ridden. And of what we produce, it is laced with poison. India is the world's 2nd largest consumer of pesticide. Every year we consume 60,000 tons of chemical pesticide. Every year 30,000 Indians die of pesticide poisoning. There are 3 trains that run every day from Punjab to Rajasthan. They are called cancer trains. You might have heard of them. Everything is laced with poison. Our export refusal rate is one of the highest in the world. 7 times more than China food export refusal rate. People, foreign countries don't want to buy the food that we produce. Forget about foreign countries. Indian states don't want to buy the foods that other states produce. Forget about states that have antagonistic political governments. Allies don't want to. You recently had the specter of Karnataka, which is governed by Congress, refusing rice grown in Punjab, which is governed by AAP, its ally. They say, I'm sorry, it is laced with poison. This is the situation. And of what we produce, we have one of the lowest rates of the food that we produce per hectare. Even of rice, we produce 4,500 kilograms of rice, which is 50% of what any average rice-producing nation like Vietnam or Thailand produces. When it comes to maize, it is 25% of what optimally can be produced. This right here is the situation. And something would have changed all this. And one politician realized, and that politician was Narendra Modi. And he brought in 3 farm laws that were, according to me, the greatest reform since independent India. and that would have catapulted us to a middle-income economy within a span of a couple of decades. But unfortunately, the moment he brought those 3 farm laws, all hell broke loose. The nation came to a standstill. The same opposition that had put these 3 farm laws almost verbatim in their own election manifestos. Just because Modi brought them and realized them, they said these are black laws. We oppose them. Delhi was laid siege to. Highways were blocked. People died. Parliament came to a standstill. And what were these 3 farm laws? The first one was that the farmers, 300 million of them, would be given a choice of selling their produce either in a government marketplace or a private marketplace. Isn't that what the bedrock for business is? To give the producer a choice, the businessman a choice. How would you feel if some of you are businessmen and they come up with an amazing product, but the government says, I'm sorry, you can't sell that product on Amazon. You have to sell it on a government website that works 10 minutes in 24 hours. You will sue the pants of the government. But we didn't allow farmers to do that. We were dictating. वो मनोज कुमार के गाने मेरे देश की धरती सोना उगले ये सोच के हमने farmers को demigod बना दिया. Farmers themselves are saying, we are not demigod. We are businessmen like you. Give us all the freedom that you give to other businessmen and other businesses. What was the second law? The second law was that we will do away with the emergency provisions of the Essential Commodities Act. Now, this is one of those bureaucratic semantic speak that just changing one word of storage to hoarding, a farmer or a businessman who had a godown was liable for a non-bailable arrest. Suddenly you find that a perishable agricultural produce was being stored. The government said it is not being stored, it is being hoarded. Arrest that person. And as a result, you've seen over the last 30, 40 years, 50 years, ever since the Essential Commodities Act came into being, no businessman or businesswoman worth his or her salt was prepared to make these state-of-the-art godowns. 24/7 that would work all year round, that would store the agricultural produce. And as a result, you've seen routinely, every month, you have farmers dumping their produce on the streets. Situation is so catastrophic now, they even spill milk, thousands of liters onto the streets. That was the second. And the third law, that you would have any business conglomerate, any businessman approaching a farmer and saying, why are you producing, using all your means, a loss-making crop? I will pay you money, you grow this, and you give that crop to me, contract farming. That again is the bedrock of how businesses work. It is on transaction, and that is how profits are made. But the tragedy was, not only did the opposition go back on all these 3, the third Contract Farming Act was already realized in Congress states. In Punjab, they had promulgated an act, Contract Farming Act. But the moment Modi brought them, they are all suddenly black laws. You opposed them. And it was one of the darkest days in independent Indian history. I think November 19th, it was 2021 when Modi repealed those farm laws. But you know, I don't mind politicians being hypocrites and going back on their word. Agar aap unka blood test lenge to cholesterol se zyada hypocrisy niklegi. What troubled me was the other arm of democracy that we still have some faith in, some hope for, the judiciary. The darkest day was not when Narendra Modi repealed those farm laws. The darkest day was when you talk of the confused role of the state. The darkest day was when the Supreme Court said this, and I'm quoting the Supreme Court. All we see are those 2 million middlemen farmers who oppose the farm laws. Where are the people who are for the farm laws? So in a sense, the Supreme Court was saying, where are those 300 million farmers who are producing what they should be doing? They are producing stuff. In the interior of Telangana, in Karnataka, in Tamil Nadu, growing rice, growing wheat, growing produce. The Supreme Court wanted all of them to stop whatever they were doing. Hop onto the nearest bullock cart or a car or a truck or a bus and come all the way to Delhi, stand outside Supreme Court and say, my lords, we are for the farm laws. Is that how democracy works? No. That is how anarchy works. And the tragedy was, a week after the Supreme Court stayed those farm laws, Supreme Court's own committee that was set up said that 80% of all farmers and farm lobbies are for the farm laws. But the ship had sailed. This is the tragedy of this country. The role of the state is so confused now. We are so shrouded by it that not just one arm of our democracy, the legislature or the executive, is confused about it. Even the judiciary is confused about it. Let me give you another example of how to bring adaptability, flexibility in our workforce. Just one city, Paris, attracts 25 million foreign tourists a year. Just one city. One country, entire country, India, attracts 11 million foreign tourists. Paris, 25 million. India, 11 million. Tourism directly employs only 30 million Indians. It should be 5 times that. Tourism directly contributes only 2.6% to our GDP. It should be 5 times that. We are an 8,000-year-old culture. We have hundreds of languages, dialects, cuisines, amazing diversity. We have amazing vistas from beaches to sand dunes, to snow-capped mountains, to green Kerala, to Karnataka, to wildlife sanctuaries in the northeast. We have 42 World Heritage Sites. Greece has half those heritage sites, and yet a small country like Greece attracts 3 times as many tourists as we do. UAE, a country of 9 million population, has more hotel rooms than India does. China has 100 times more hotel rooms than India has. What are we doing? Is this how you are going to make a nation developed or a Viksit? Bodh Gaya. Bodh Gaya should be the Vatican of the East. It is where Lord Buddha attained nirvana, enlightenment. Chinese, South Koreans, Japanese would be falling over each other to make Bodh Gaya the Vatican of the East. We have 535 million Buddhists around the world. They would want to make this as the greatest attraction for Buddhism. And yet, the annual municipal budget of Bodh Gaya Corporation, municipal corporation, is less than the production budget of the failed movie Adipurush, 500 crores. Bodhi tree under which Lord Buddha attained enlightenment should be the apple of the eye, the most sacrosanct place for all 535 million Buddhists, and yet only 0.25 million people visited the Bodhi tree. The Sun Temple at Peru attracts 1.5 million foreign tourists. The Sun Temple at Konark attracts 9,000. We are not plucking the lowest hanging fruit, which comes in the shape of our tremendous tourism potential. And it's not that the government didn't realize it. At the heart of it, we have to skill people. There is a 60% gap in the supply and demand of skilled labor as far as tourism is concerned. 60% gap. So the Prime Minister said in 2014-15, he started the Skill India mission. The aim was that by 2022, we will have 400 million Indians skilled. 2022 came and went. How many did we skill? 14 million. Target 400 million, skilled 14 million. And it's not that people don't realize skilling is not just one aspect of it. You need apprentices, because the more apprentices you have, the more skilled education you would be able to impart, the more skilling that would happen. And India has had an apprenticeship act going back to Jawaharlal Nehru, 1962. But we have a working population of 600 million labor force. We have only 0.5 million apprentices. What is the state doing? I'll tell you what the state is doing. The state is running 495 hotels. All of them are loss-making. And the only time they make revenue is when they have to ferry politician from one political party to another कि भाई वो shift ना कर जाए. आपने देखा होगा resort politics में. We are not plucking the lowest hanging fruit. We are watching it rot. And that right there is the tragedy. But having cursed the state enough, सिर्फ state की responsibility नहीं है ये. हमारी भी responsibility है. If we do not remove this confusion that surrounds us as to what our role is, How can we blame everything on the state? Now, the fact of the matter is that I am all for a welfare state. India needs to be a welfare state. Otherwise, we will wipe out tens, maybe hundreds or millions of Indians. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants an island of prosperity in an ocean of despair. None of us, you, me, anyone. Nobody wants a GDP per capita of 50,000 USDs of a gated community, while the rest of India wallows in a GDP per capita of 3,000 USDs. Nobody wants that. And if we did not have India as a welfare state, we can never be Viksit. Because the fact of the matter is, we have been a great welfare state even in the last 10 years. And it has shown welfarism is important. Those 110 million new toilet has saved that household upwards of 50,000 rupees in health costs. Those 100 million Ujjwala gas connections that Modi has given, did you know that every year directly 150,000 lives are being saved through Ujjwala scheme? Because even I didn't know this. The biggest cause of infant mortality in India is not some disease or infection. It is household pollution. Through the pipe when the mother blows wind so that her stove might blow up. That is what is actually causing infants to die. If Modi had not provided 120 million tap water connections, did you know that the diarrheal deaths under 5 have been slashed by half? So many other welfare schemes. For example, 370 million Ayushman health cards that have been distributed. You have treated more than the population of United Kingdom, 70 million people through them. But did you know this? That out-of-pocket expenditure was the fastest descent into poverty by an Indian. And that has been slashed by 27% because of Ayushman health cards. And what I would say is independent India's greatest achievement is to have vaccinated 1 billion Indians twice over within a year. Welfarism is important. Welfarism saves lives, and not just the health. You look at economic prosperity. Sir mentioned Jan Dhan account, economic inclusion, Mudra loans. Welfarism is important, but we need to realize this. Welfarism / socialism, you can call it whatever, is only possible not in a socialist state, but in a capitalist state. You need to generate the money in order for you to then spend it or distribute it. And that right there is the problem. Welfarism is good. Freebism is not. And we as a society, as a people, are refusing to draw that line between welfarism and freebism. And unless we draw that line, I'm sorry, forget about 2047. India is looking at an abyss from where escape is impossible. And we don't even realize this. Admittedly, a politician will never agree and draw that line. For a politician, every freebism is welfarism. वो कहेगा भाई मैं, why are you calling this a freebism? I am doing this for the welfare of the people. We, the citizens, have to draw that line. And it's not that easy. You have to define what freebism is and what welfarism is. There's an abstract swing to it. But all of us have to draw that line. How do you? I myself have defined it. Everyone may have some parameter, but we have to think along those lines. For me, welfarism is using our taxpayers' money for the welfare of the nation, for the prosperity of the nation, health, wealth, education, being more flexible. So it is pro-national interest. And freebism is using taxpayers' money for the benefit of the politician or the political party, or for appeasing a vote bank, or for appeasing a minority or any other segment of the society. So welfarism is pro-national interest, and freebism is anti-national. Somebody has to draw that line. Let me exemplify this as to how confused we are of our role. I may sound patronizing, but please bear with me, and please participate in this show of hands. How many of you love your families? Please raise your hand. Thank you so much. All the hands have gone up. How many amongst you have their families that are in debt? Not a single hand has gone up. So all of you love your families. None of your families are in debt. And again, at the risk of sounding patronizing, another question. How many of you love India? Please raise your hands. Almost all the hands. That person didn't. You're not a communist, sir. You haven't raised your hand. JNU se to nahi hai na? So look, the fact of the matter is all of you love your families. None of your families are in debt. All of you love India. Then how on earth are you, me, everyone able to sleep every night knowing that India is under a debt of 260 lakh crores? हमें नींद कैसे आ रही है? Knowing that our states have ratcheted up a cumulative debt of 110 lakh crores. Somebody has to pay for this. We are not America that right now is on a debt of $38 trillion. It might as well be $50 trillion. They don't care. They'll print money, that chopper money. We have no such luxury. Somebody has to pay for it. And when many of you applauded when I said 10 years ago we had 350 startups, right now we have 120,000. सबसे पहले उन पे tax गिरेगी. They would have to pay additional tax for this. Unless we realize that this is a debt trap out of which we cannot escape if we don't do something about it. But are we doing something about it? What do I mean by freebism? For example, to give you very quick examples. Freebism is every government, when it wants to get elected, party says, we will give free pilgrimages to senior citizens. अरे क्यों भाई, हमारा पैसा है. आपको उनका वोट चाहिए, हमारे पैसे से उनको क्यों भेज रहे हो? अरविंद केजरीवाल जी, when he was in Delhi, the chief minister, अब तो उनकी आत्मा है, वो पंजाब चले गए हैं. He promised every Delhi senior citizen free trip to Dwarka if elected. Why? It's our money. And every party does it. Congress said free trip to Madurai Meenakshi. Samajwadi Party said free trip to Ajmer Dargah. And even BJP is not immune. In Nagaland, they promised free trip if they got elected to Nagaland, to Jerusalem. लोग अयोध्या नहीं लेके गए, जेरूसलम ढूंढ रहे हैं कहाँ पे है, कहाँ जाना है. It's our money. Hajj subsidies, monthly salaries to imams and all those things. That is what freebism is. It is against national interest. It is to placate a vote bank. Same goes with ad budgets. In the last 10 years, the central government has spent 8,000 crores in government ads. What are these ads? We don't even consider them. We don't even read them. Every morning you flip over a newspaper, you see center spreads of one politician wishing each other happy birthday or some Jayanti, Gandhi Jayanti, ye Jayanti, wo Jayanti. That's our money. And we don't even realize the fact that by it, not only is it being wasted, the government is actually bribing the press. Because when was the last time you had these press or the media run a campaign against government budget? वैसे बहुत morality और ethics की बात करते हैं, but they fight like cats and dogs for that same 8,000 crores. And the government actually uses it as a whip. If you publish bad news about us, we will stop this trap. It has happened so many times. That is what freebie is. To give you very quick a couple of other examples, in 2005, celebrated economists, Dr. Manmohan Singh, of course, he was the late Dr. Manmohan Singh, and Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia said, we cannot go on like this. The nation will go bankrupt the way we are doling out pensions.